Well, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Great. And Charles, I assume you will live stream too, so I'll wait for the
Yes,
thumbs up on that.
I was just on the verge.
Yeah, no worries.
We have 3 people in the waiting room.
Okay. Do they all appear to be related to the Inlet Island Urban Renewal Project, or?
Yes, they must be.
Okay.
Only name I don't recognize is Tom Kinslow, but he's with Alt Architects.
Oh, okay. All
I'll
right.
let them in.
Yeah, sure. Let them in and then we'll get started. Hi, folks. Welcome. We are going to get started. So I'll call the meeting to order. This is the August 23rd meeting of the IURA Economic Development Committee. Nels, agenda additions or deletions?
Have no changes to the agenda.
No, I would just flag for committee members, there was a revised packet sent out just a few hours ago with a revised resolution related to Inlet Island. So that will be discussed later. Charles, public comments, written or verbal?
Yes, we did get a public comment from Sunny Days by email a little before noon today.
Okay.
So I can either share it on the screen or read it out. It's not that long.
Why don't you share it on the screen and then we can add it to the record of the meeting? Jeffrey. All right, is there more after that last line? Has the failure of this developer? Oh, yeah. Okay, I've read the letter. Doug, Charlotte, are you guys, let me just give me a thumbs up when you're good.
Good.
Okay, great. Charles, let's make sure it's added to the record for the meeting and shared out accordingly. Just before we go to minutes, does anybody on the committee have a comment or a response? Question? No. Okay. Great. So we'll move forward then to review of the meeting minutes from July 19th. Is there a motion to accept those minutes? Or, yeah. Doug, seconded by Charlotte. Any amendments? No. All those in favor? Great. That is unanimous. And I should just note for everyone who's here and for the record, Leslie Ackerman has recused herself from this meeting. She is employed by Ithaca Neighborhood Housing, which is engaged in the development team for Inlet Island Urban Renewal Project. Okay, so that brings us to our main agenda item for today, which is several discussion items related to the renewal project. We have several members of the development team here as well. Maybe first, I mean, I think what I'll have Nels do under A is just give us kind of a project update. But maybe before we do the project update, maybe it would just be useful for members of the development team just to kind of go around. So we just introduce who's here because I'm sure we'll be hearing from you throughout. So maybe from the team of Whittam, you want to start and then we'll go around the room here.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I was just about to say that Steve Flash can't get in. It looks like he's getting in. So
Okay.
my important news. I'm Scott Whittam, Whittam Planning and Design. Ife Yan is with me here in the office. Jacob Van Mecco is on Zoom. I think Jacob will be driving for us, and that is it for Whittam.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know who wants to go next. Tom, you look like you're unmiked, so you want to go?
Sure. Tom Kinslow with Holt Architects.
Great. Lynn?
Lynn Truane with the INHS.
Great. And Steve and Jeffrey, go ahead.
Hi, Steve. Yeah, Steve Flash here. I did just make it in.
Good.
No
Glad to hear.
difficulty.
Jeff
Yeah.
Remine remotely.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so Nels, why don't I first hand it to you to kind of bring us up to speed on process and schedule and just review that, make sure everyone in the committee is up to speed on that, and then we'll move on from there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we executed an exclusive negotiation agreement in December, and it had a clock for managing the negotiation process. And that clock started after the appraisal was completed. So it took us several months to get an appraiser under contract and complete that work. They did accomplish that task finally. The appraisal came back at $22.50 per square foot of land when you looked at the entire parcel's holdings. And then that started a 100-day clock for the developer to submit a revised development program and additional materials that are cited in the ENA, primarily the issues to be resolved components, as well as a revised development program. The developer did accomplish that task on August 8th. We received that information. So the next step in this process is a 30-day period for the IRA to review the material, and it was structured that we would positively figure out a way to bring the sites together and within 30 days, issue to the developer a disposition and development agreement, proposed disposition and development agreement that would then give time for the developer to either sign it or provide back a counter proposal. And there's a back and forth 15-day period involved with those counter proposals. At the end of the day, if the developer never signs the proposed disposition agreement, the exclusive negotiation agreement terminates. If it is signed, then we move to the next phase in the clock, which is another 90 days, I think, for going through a public hearing process and consulting with the Board of Public Works about lands that are city-owned to be considered whether they're surplus, and also to eventually bring it to the IRA to see if the IRA agrees with the proposed disposition and development agreement that was signed by the developer but not signed by the IRA. Since the IRA is proposing the disposition and development agreement, it's presumed that there's a good chance the agency would support that, but the issues come up under public hearing. Following that, if the agency approves it, but doesn't sign it, it then goes through that site plan review and environmental review process, which can be a lengthy process for larger projects. And once the environmental review has been completed, it can go to the Common Council for consideration of approving the disposition and development agreement. So that's a nutshell view. You can see that it could easily take us into late 2023 to get all those steps finished. But the first step is to make sure that the agency has enough information and has enough satisfaction with the development proposal to structure a disposition and development agreement. And this disposition and development agreement typically would have a lot of contingencies. One way to think of it is it's a purchase and sale agreement, and the IRA is the seller and the developer is the purchaser, and the seller is going to impose a series of contingencies prior to closing on the agreement. Some of the contingencies are going to be procedural, such as Common Council approval and public hearings. Others could be, planning board approval of a site plan would be a likely contingency to the disposition development agreement. So what I guess I'm trying to frame here is not every issue needs to be ironed out at this point in time. but conceptually, the agency should be supportive of the development program that's proposed. And if there are issues that need addressing, if we're falling short on that, then we should work those issues out prior to moving forward with the disposition and development agreement. I think that's where we are at this meeting today. And if anybody's looking for the details of the exclusive negotiation agreement, it's on page 40 of the packet, of the PDF packet.
Great, thank you, Nels. Yeah, so just to kind of frame this, and then I'll see if there's any questions from Charlotte or Doug, is, we're going to review the revised program submitted by the developer on the 8th and really kind of go through that list of issues that have been identified in the ENA. And if we're satisfied that everything's been met, then we can move forward with a draft EDA. If we're not, that will then, we potentially would then have to have some additional time to go back and forth with the development team, in which case we might want to request from the development team an extension. So any questions about timeline? No? You're both good? Okay, so then Nels, why don't we keep going, and why don't you give us an update on discussions about DEC?
Sure. So near the end of your packet, unfortunately, I didn't put it in sequence, right? But there is I think it's on page 53, is it? Charles is moving there. Yeah, those images, Charles, right there. Yeah, so on page 52 and 53 of the packet are some conceptual plans which were utilized in discussions with DEC about how could the city acquire the property where the Coast Guard Auxiliary licensed the building for incorporation into the project. And so you can see on this plan that the yellow bounded area is essentially where the building is now. This is superimposed over a early version of the development program. And that DEC is open to transferring that property to the city for inclusion in the project. They also have some of their own objectives they want to accomplish, which is to provide some logistical support for their maintenance of the flood control channel, as well as for some of the dredge activities that are proposed in the near future. So conceptually, you can see here the boundary lines, where that boundary site is, where there's a yellow arrow going down from the top. That's kind of where the building is currently. But the triangle of land that the DEC controls goes north towards the point in a kind of a triangle fashion. And you can see where those little green arrows are on the right-hand side of the image, shows where that triangle is. So if, Charles, if you can advance to the next image on the next page, it'll show it in greater detail. If you just move that up. So again, now we're looking at the island looking north with the flood control channel on the west and the barge canal on the east, although we're only going as far east as Teganic Boulevard in this image. And the yellow boundary is the current building license to the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And on the left-hand side shaded is the 25-foot wide DEC maintenance easement that runs all along the flood control channel. And if you go to the, the very northern end of this image is where the Boatyard Grill is, with the parking lot between the Coast Guard Auxiliary and the Boatyard Grill. So what DEC is proposing is oh, well, I should say they're open to a transfer of property at a kind of a fair exchange of values. And oops, what happened there? We shifted around. What they would like is to retain a portion of the site for logistical purposes and convey the yellow bounded area to the city. And also they would want to see that any encroachment of the existing building into the easement be removed, which would probably require some either partial demolition or full demolition of the building, so that they would have a full easement area open and unimpeded. And secondly, that they would gain an access right somewhere else on the island and the barge canal side for dredge purposes, which would be on city property, not on developer property. So this discussion has been moving forward positively, and I think it's likely we can come to some agreement, but there are details that need still to be worked out. And the state also has a process for property transfer. So there's a timeline associated with this once conceptual issues are agreed upon. But generally speaking, it's the DEC indicates that there could be a fair exchange, which may not involve a whole lot of dollar exchange, if the value that is provided to them is equivalent or to the value of the building. In other words, by removing a portion of the building into the encroachment area and by the city providing an access easement to the barge canal system, there may be a very close to fair, a $0 exchange or a very modest exchange amount. Yeah, so that's a positive aspect. The questionable issue is to make sure that the DEC acquired portion of the site doesn't somehow detract from the overall development of the island, because their interest is in logistics and kind of maintenance issues, and we're trying to upgrade the entire experience of the island. So there's a little bit of a potential for a mismatch there, and we're trying to make sure that we can work out those issues. So given that the DEC wants to maintain the northern portion of the Coast Guard Auxiliary called property, it doesn't make sense for the developer to purchase the right-of-way, the street right-of-way north of that area anymore. So in the proposal, you'll see that the developers indicated they're no longer interested in acquiring lands north of the Coast Guard Auxiliary building because it really can't be integrated into their project. And so that would exclude one of the potential parcels from the project site. So I'm open to answer any questions about that fairly confusing, detailed response. The general tenure is DEC is open to a land swap. The details of the exact boundaries of the property transfer are still being negotiated.
So can you just clarify with everything you just said and the image that we have on the screen here, who owns what currently of the gold and the pink?
Charles, can you bring that down a little bit? Okay, so the state of New York owns the entire yellow areas of the site, the boundary, as well as the purple area. So it becomes a very tight triangle, right? It's
Right.
wide where the building is, and it comes to a point at the north. That's the parcel that we're talking about when we're talking about the Coast Guard Auxiliary parcel.
Okay, so the state owns that, and so there's not really an exchange here. What they're willing to do is sell us the yellow and retain the pink or purple.
Correct. But they would offset the purchase price based on the cost to remove the infringement into the easement, that portion of the building that intrudes into the flood control channel, and also provide recognizes value access to another part of to the barge canal through city property at the southern part of the island. And there's also a little bit of a former building foundation just south of the marine building that's not detailed on this plan, but is shown just immediately south of the Coast Guard Auxiliary property, which also infringes into the easement. It's only a foundation wall at this point, but that could be another value to the DEC to remove that from the flood control easement, because they essentially try to treat the flood control easement area as an area with no vertical features at all, just grass.
Thank you. Doug has a question.
Nels, in terms of that easement, is there any problem with putting a multi-purpose trail through there, either stone dust or asphalt?
No, in fact, the current trail we have along the flood control channel is within that easement. DEC has permitted those kind of improvements. Again, provided it doesn't have vertical features that would be, I guess, viewed as a snag hazard should there be trees and debris coming down the flood control channel. So our current waterfront promenade there is located within that easement, and because that's land owned by the city with an easement to DEC, as long as we comply with the terms of the easement, I don't believe we even need DEC approval, formal approval.
And can you clarify just their current views on both the repurposing of the dock in the flood control channel, which the developer is proposing for kind of personal powered watercraft, and what is proposed to be off the north point that they seem less inclined to?
Yeah, they are aware of the development plan, and We haven't finalized negotiations regarding the floating dock area, but they seemed very open to the idea of a kayak style dock on that location. But we have not formalized anything. We're still working through the big issues, and I think we view that as a small issue, but a very important issue for public access. Because those docks have been there so long already, it seems quite likely that they will agree to continue some of those docks on that area. Regarding the North Point Island, the extension at the lookout point north of the Boatyard Grill, they did not express enthusiasm about that dock, about extending that out in our discussions. I think it was partially related to the fact that they're planning a dredge operations in this area, and they may view that as an obstruction during dredging activities. On the other hand, it is kind of a shoal out there right now, and it would perhaps, benefit. So we want to continue discussions on that, especially Steve had some ideas about how a dock could extend out that they might find more acceptable in a different kind, a particular alignment. So I think that's something we still want to take a look at. While that dock is shown on the development program site plan you have, at this point in time, we don't have any formal commitment by the developers to develop that because DEC was not enthusiastic in early discussions about that. So that might be an issue we need to want to revisit at some point.
Okay, thanks. And do you have a timeline? I know we're dealing with the state, so unclear, but is the group that's working on this, do they feel like there's a working timeline, or is it obscure?
They can get back with some detailed kind of proposals just last week to us, and I think we can respond. And we responded that there were some concerns about one aspect of their proposal. But I think we are going back and forth. We've had very good cooperation from the regional director who's involved in the discussions, and I think we are getting we can make progress, quite quickly, given the fact that it's involving a state agency and a municipality and a developer all included in the discussions.
Okay, great. Give the development team any chance to kind of chime in here on any things related to this aspect before we go look at your program in depth. I don't know, Steve, I know you've been involved in this too.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I think it was understood in our meeting with the state and the DEC that lopping off a corner of the building really wasn't feasible, and that essentially the whole building would have to come down. And the easement, certainly as I envisioned it, and apparently this is maybe an issue that we have to discuss with the DEC. As it exists now, there's already a curb cut and there's already parking there. And the use of the easement is for access. If the DEC plans, and obviously this would be a topic of discussion, and Noah has talked about it a little bit, the DEC is planning to use that parcel and remove that whole triangular spot that essentially removes egress from the Boatyard Grill, let alone a bunch of parking, then we have a problem. I kind of doubt that's really what they need to do, and I'm confident they'll work with us, but that certainly would have to be clarified, the commitment, before we could proceed. And so the building itself would have to come down, and that obviously has a bearing on, the value of the property, and there are a lot of negotiations before the city would be able to even commit to transferring it to us. So that's also presents a timeline issue as well as a planning issue, just in terms of what we can actually do with the site. So
Right, and Nels, who are you envisioning would be accountable for moving the building? Us before we transfer it to the developer?
No, and the vision we've had so far is that the transfer would, the developer would be responsible for removing the infringement into the building, and that the demolition of the building would be used as an offset for the purchase price. So The
Right.
city and the IRA's role would be as a pass-through to the developer.
But what would not be a pass-through, I think, which bears some discussion, is any environmental cleanup that would be required. We don't know that there's any. I believe many years ago, the state has at least verbally stated, oh, no, we don't have any contamination. Back when we were cleaning up the Boatyard Grill site, that was their position. But I think as the city, before they could transfer it to us, and we certainly would require a little bit more commitment than that. And the environmental cleanup would be tough to have as an offset if there really isn't a purchase price, given all the other things going on.
Okay.
That's just an issue that have to be clarified. It could be an offset if, against the purchase price that we are paying the city,
Right.
For the rest of the parcel, but that would have to be worked out.
Nels, you look like you have something to add, no?
Well, I assure you, the city's not interested in acquiring a contaminated site either. So, I think there's a need to do some subsurface investigation on the site prior to any conveyance.
Okay. Okie dokie. So let's then move to C, unless there's any other questions on B at the moment. And it sounds like maybe the best thing is to turn it over to Jacob, maybe. Are you going to drive us kind of going through the changes to the submission? Is that what we're going to do here?
Yeah, if we could share.
You should have co-host powers right now, so you should be able to share.
Ife is going to be sharing the screen, and I'll walk through as she puts through the slides, if that'll work.
We cannot start a screen unless someone can stop this sharing right now.
Yeah, Charles, if you could stop sharing the agenda.
That's with them. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Now your co-host, you should be able to do it.
Yes, great, thank you.
So, yeah, we put together a brief presentation to go through some of the changes that have been made since that older site plan that you saw briefly underlaid below some of the other documents earlier. We did want to do a quick walkthrough of some of the other site constraints, just so that everyone is aware of what is driving some of the design decisions and the locations of the buildings and the overall programming of the site. This first slide shows some of the existing property lines, which are obviously a bit out of date, given that they predate the Ithaca flood protection channel. But for reference, they show the general footprint of the parcels that are for sale on the site and the existing Teganic Boulevard right-of-way. Next slide. So the main constraints, as many of you are probably already aware, are the New York State DEC easement for the flood control channel on the west side of the island. And then also the NYSEG easement is also a fairly major legal constraint, as well as a physical constraint with those existing overhead power lines that sort of just these are some immovable constraints on the site. So next slide. We also have some infrastructure on the site that we are currently operating under the understanding that it is not financially feasible to relocate. That would be the utility poles shown in red. However, there are some other utility poles in yellow that we think probably are simpler to modify or that we can work around. But the ones in red are probably not going anywhere as part of this project. And those flanking Teganic Boulevard do create a real constraint to the width of the road and the road alignment as it enters the site on its existing footprint. So this is the 50-foot street right-of-way approximately. I say approximately and 50 feet because it is not consistently 50 feet wide. 50 feet is the standard city right-of-way for a city street, but the old Teganic Boulevard right-of-way does not follow this. But just for reference, this is the shape of that. We also have some operational constraints. One of the main goals of the project of the development is to maintain and not impair the existing working waterfront operations of the boat yard, of the boat storage shed. The lift itself has some real width requirements for where it moves and operates. It does need to be able to make its way up the existing Teganic Boulevard to the maintenance shed located, right there. And then we're also showing an east-west arrow showing where you'll see as we get into our site plan, where we're also considering that a need to move boats for temporary surface storage. As we just discussed, the DEC access and staging area is shown. This is approximate and clearly still in conversation, but also the area below that in blue is space that is necessary not just for the DEC access, but also for emergency vehicle turning at the end of the right-of-way, and that is incorporated into portions of the parking lot that exists at the north end. So we are anticipating that those constraints provide us with a remaining available development area shown in purple that remains left over once you account for all of those very real constraints that sort of limit the development area here. So with that in mind, we have some changes to the conceptual development plan. As you can see here, a lot of this is very similar to what we had shown before. However, we've made some adjustments to some of the drive lanes, prints. Specifically, one of the major changes is the demolition of that existing building in the DEC parcel, and how that impacts the stay-tell building, or what we're calling the stays currently. So that footprint has shifted a little bit to reflect an ability to move a little bit further north, which opens up some more space towards the south end, and also some shifting of that second half of the building to be a little bit closer to the water to add a little more interest to the overall building mass and footprint. The anchor building also has been shifted a little bit. We have Tom Kinslow here from Alt. They've been working on some preliminary programming and design for floor plans for the INHS building, which we're calling the anchor here as just a temporary label. And so we're looking at positioning that setback a little bit further from that parking access aisle, which will also, other than that, however, for the most part, the plan remains more or less the same. There are some other adjustments I'll point out, such as relocating the drop-off zone on the stays to the corner of the building, which creates more of an exclamation point, if you will, on that corner, and also works a little bit better with the way that the width of the parcel that we have to work with there works, as it sort of narrows down at the end. We also made some adjustments to the layout of the pedestrian walkways to accommodate this. We adjusted some of the locations of the crosswalks with an eye for safety, and just generally have made tweaks throughout. But by and large, the plan has remained more or less the same. This diagram illustrates some of the as well as the vehicle access routes, front trail.
Jacob, we
to
lost you for a
allow-
second. Jacob, just step back a little bit and we lost you for a second. So the go ahead.
Apologies. Yeah, my connection might not be perfect. Yeah, so this diagram is showing the circulation patterns for both vehicle and pedestrian or multimodal traffic on the site. So the blue arrows are illustrating locations for pedestrian or bicycle traffic, and the orange and yellow represent existing vehicular routes and proposed vehicular routes respectively. So we are looking to improve the connectivity of the site to the existing waterfront trail connections. Those being the connection underneath the bridge near the southwest corner of the site, and that connection through the DEC easement along the waterfront up to the lookout point at the north end, which is a stone dust trail at the moment, and then bringing that connection back around and into the site on a connection of sidewalks and crosswalks to provide internal circulation and access to the building fronts and parking areas.
So this will clearly be more defined as we move into further detail. It's a little bit in flux. We've had a great meeting on site with Eric Hathaway and Aaron Kadati, talking about some of the constraints and some of the desires that all of us have for connectivity through here. As the building footprints get finalized and we're able to, as I say, move into more detail, this will be further refined. But this is where we stand right now. Ife, any further additions that you want to add? And then we'll hand it back to you, Jacob, to finish up.
I think Jake got it pretty much. And the last, I think this is our last slide, and we have more technical drawings. If you would like to preview, we can introduce. And Jake, you can continue.
Jake, final things?
Yeah, that's right. We also, as part of, can you hear me?
Just.
Yeah.
Okay. Just I would also add that we did submit a preliminary zoning analysis chart identifying building setbacks, building height, total parking quantities, and things like that. I don't know that we need to get into that in any great detail at this meeting. That will certainly be something that is addressed by the planning board and the city staff when they review this for zoning compliance. But generally, I would point out that the zoning requirements for this site are relatively less constrictive than certainly other parts of the city, and the major constraints that do exist are mostly related to building height rather than building location in relation to property lines. There's no required parking minimums for this area, and there's no minimum setbacks from the property line. At least generally, there's some nuance to that, but it's fairly loose. The building height is limited to 5 stories, and we are planning to build up to that limit, both in the story height, and there is also a building height foot limitation, and we expect to come close for the 5-story limit. One other thing I would point out, in previous plans, we were showing solar panels on the roof of the boat shed building. After a feasibility study, it was determined that the existing structure was not going to accommodate those, and so we're looking to offset that with off-site investment in solar. Unfortunately, the existing boat shed structure just won't accommodate solar. Nels, I think I see your hand raised. Is that what that is?
It is, but I just wanted to clarify, I guess, you mentioned in the proposed pedestrian improvements, it seemed like some of the lighter colored blue, which was the proposed improvements, went along the existing waterfront promenade trail. Are there proposed improvements in those areas, or is that just identifying that as, or maybe my color sense is a little off, but it seemed like those were areas that were light blue.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is, yeah, on the west side of the site, particularly along the top of that seawall, and by the existing boat dock, the floating dock, there is an existing trail. However, it's more of a rudimentary stone dust trail that is not particularly well maintained, but it is there, and it is serviceable, and you can use that as a way to connect from the asphalt waterfront trail extension near the gym building, underneath the bridge and up all the way to Lookout Point. So that is an existing connection. I believe that is the only existing formal pedestrian pathway on the entire site, short of some existing sidewalk in front of the boatyard grill, which I suppose also should have been in a dark blue. So that is an error on our part. Apologies.
Thanks for the clarification.
Just to clarify that one more time, to make it like super simple, you're not proposing any improvement along to the promenade along the western edge, just keeping that as is. And so from Lookout Point back around, you would add something, but from the bridge to Lookout Point, you plan to use what is existing.
That's the current plan, and connecting to that.
Okay. Okay, I'll look to my colleagues for just maybe first questions of clarification. I think Nels has a nice structure for us to go through all of the issues, but I think it's important to get questions of clarification first. So Charlotte, over to you.
Yeah, just real quick, did an earlier version of this have the playground for the anchor in a more public space in between the two buildings? Or am I confusing the applications? I think there's a good public interest in actually having a playground that's public accessible to kind of anyone that feels like they want to stop by the island, rather than necessarily being only attached to that building. And I can't remember if it was that way and it changed or not.
So I'm not sure what was shown earlier, but I will tell you that with the funding sources that we're using, we cannot have the playground open to the general public. There could, in theory, be another playground on the site that's open to the public, but it can't be the one that's associated with our units. That's a requirement of our funding sources.
Okay.
We had shown some additional space around the exterior of the anchor building as public amenity space, but I think as Lynn said, there is some nuance there to what can be public and private depending on the ownership and control of that. So at the moment, we've sort of backed off from getting too specific in the programming and design of those spaces until the programming and function of the buildings themselves is a little farther along as far as, you know, where the door entrances and exits are and who has access to what.
But to your point, Charlotte, yes, we had shown a public playground, and we've, as Jacob says, we're backing off that till we fully understand how much we can give to the public and how much is inaccessible in terms of program.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. I know we looked at a lot of versions, so I wasn't really sure, but I understand the position.
Doug, I see your hand.
So I think planning staff raised this question too. I just wanted to understand why from the original plan, the buildings were all in an alignment and now they're shifted off one another. It seems like there would be benefit to having more open space on the flood control side than between parking and buildings.
So part of the building shifting was due to the original, or rather the previous plan had incorporated the DEC building, the building on the DEC parcel into the actual footprint of the proposed building that they were going to be combined. That building going away sort of shifted some things at that end, which led to a bit of a domino effect of adjustments to the floor plan and how it relates to the width of that space, and really that led to us re-examining the way that the masses were going to be sitting on the site, and just looking for a way to improve the space between the two buildings to allow greater access to the visual access to the waterfront between the two buildings. They had previously been shown much closer together as well. And we'd actually also found that the footprint, the overall footprint of at least the INHS building is actually smaller than had previously been proposed. And so we had pulled it a little bit further away from the parking area to, I guess, allow a little bit more breathing area in that space and to improve just the visual access to the waterfront.
And Doug, to your point, while still maintaining a really robust green edge to the water as well, as much as possible, so that means something, so it's not broken up too much. The area between the buildings connecting then along green space. And again, this will be further designed. We're just showing a color and some trees, but to have that, again, have enough punch and not be broken up is our current thought.
I've got one more clarification on the diagram we're looking at here, and it's based on Charlotte's question because I hadn't noticed this before. So around the anchor, or at least on the west side of the anchor, there appears to be this black line. Are you indicating there that there would be a fence or some other way that would restrict access to the public from the green space around the anchor?
No, apologies. That's a graphic error. That's simply a line on the DEC easement. Really, the DEC easement should be shown for the whole length, but no, that's not a physical line. That's merely that's an error. Apologies.
It's a really good question, though, Chris. I was concerned about that when I saw the line as well. I don't remember.
Right. So the playground would be secured in some way with access only to residents,
Correct.
but the rest of that would be open space.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, Nels, what I would suggest is maybe we go through the table in the whereases as a way of just making sure that we review each of the issues. You've indicated in some areas where you think the submission is resolved or at least has a clear contingency, and other areas where maybe we need to have more discussion. So I would suggest, realize it's already 4:20, but that we start at A and just try to see how efficiently we can work through A to M, and then see where we are on the other whereas. But let me first go through A through M.
Hey, I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay,
Um,
so, all right. And feel free, Charlotte and Doug, just chime in with any sort of questions. So with A, project massing, we're saying that, in terms of where we are right now, we're happy with this, subject to planning board, site plan review, et cetera.
Right, the proposal here is that the agency looks at the issues that the agency has primary jurisdiction over and defer issues that can be resolved by another approving agency like the planning board, provided the basic framework is supportive of the agency's vision for the urban renewal project. So in the case of project massing, my recommendation is to consider that satisfied, because the issue will be further refined at the site plan review stage. And the issues here, A through M, some of them were feasibility issues and some of them were issues to work out. This is a little bit more of a feasibility issue, in that we wanted to make sure that it was within the zoning envelope, and these are within the zoning envelope.
Right. The only reason I don't think we need to spend more time on it than that, but I will note that some common council members were concerned about the massing, despite the fact that it's common council that created the zoning. So I just want to make sure that, we can give a thumbs up here, planning board could give a thumbs up, but obviously at the end of the day, common council has to approve the DDA with these buildings at the zoning envelope, which is what I'm hearing the development team is proposing. And I think there was some discussion in a prior meeting with the developer saying, yeah, we could look at it, maybe, And I think what we're saying is, no, this is the program. It's 5 stories, 63 feet. And we're going forward with that.
Right. And there was some discussion about the size of the affordable housing project at one point, and this is, my recollection is 55 units, maybe it's 53, which is a scale that was viewed by some common council members as very acceptable to be able to fit into a neighborhood or into a development area.
Yeah.
52 units.
52, thank you.
I'm sorry, 54 units, 52,000 square feet. Sorry, that's the.
All right,
Right.
thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, yeah, I'm fine with A unless anybody else has any questions. Yeah, okay, so B, project site. Again, there's this question about what will actually happen with the DEC. So you're saying yes here, but it sounds like we need to clarify that first, right?
Yes, in terms of the property to be acquired from the DEC, yes, that would still be an issue that needs to be finalized. The other point to point out here, though, is that the developer is proposing to purchase all the city and IURA owned lands in the project site, with the exception of the Teganic Road right of way north of the Coast Guard Auxiliary, which is really no longer contiguous to the rest of the site.
Great. Okay. Okay, so parking. I've got a question about this. I think I'm generally satisfied. I think somewhere in the revised submission, so this is a question really for Whittam, I guess. You referred to, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it, but it was the issue of like, kind of potentially having some common parking management system. And I assume you were referring to something like Park Mobile. So maybe you could just kind of clarify, it's like 1 or 2 sentences, and I'm sorry if I can't find the exact page, where you're talking about how parking should be consistent or managed across the site. Maybe you could just tell us what you're envisioning there. Does that ring any bells, Doug or Scott or anybody?
I'm trying to remember if we made that decision. Steve?
Yeah, no, I think that would be my bailiwick. Yes. We understand, I think it was raised some preliminary concerns, which we shared too, of preventing parking wars by having segregated parking. And we have had discussions with an entity similar to Park Mobile that would be able to do a gateless parking system, and the management of it for the public access. All of the parking would be public access, and the rate structure and enforcement would be through a gateless system where you can and as businesses pay in, or if they do, it helps cover the cost, and then they can get a chit or whatever at the entrance to the door, you know. If, for example, it's the boatyard or however that's going to work. I mean, it's not obviously not finalized, but it would be coordinated with the city. When I propose that we have some discussions about how that could be done, and if enforcement is done by the city, then the city can collect the fees on that, all of which would have to be worked out. But it was an idea to prevent the parking wars that the current system is designed to do, and as it works now.
So Nels, you're satisfied that meets our requirements for at least 80 shared public parking spaces and managing the city's prior commitments on the island?
Yes, but it will require that the city actually agree to the method of managing the parking in any parking located in street rights of way.
Okay,
Right, because the parking management would cover both the street parking as well as the
yeah,
Right.
public
Yeah.
access on the site itself.
right, which largely I think is actually a good thing, actually, right? One consistent system across all the parking on the island seems like a good idea.
It doesn't have to be just, well, it can be on the island. It doesn't have to be just on the site either. It can
Yes.
extend to
Could
the,
extend to the rest of the island too.
right.
And that's been clocked by city transportation people, Nels, as something that needs to be worked out on their end.
Yes, they're open to different models. They actually are working with their consultant Stantec on looking at different models for parking. I think the initial advice they received from their consultant was it does make sense to have common management of all parking, all public parking. Whether that's the developer managing it or the city managing it or a third party managing it. The idea was some sort of common approach for all the parking.
Okay.
To
Any
be worked out
questions?
though, for sure.
Anybody else want to chime in on parking? Everyone's favorite topic. Okay, public street circulation. Again, we're kind of saying planning board is better positioned than IURA to get into the final details of this with transportation staff, right? That's what we're saying here.
Correct.
Okay, so Marina Operations is the first area we have a question. And I think after, I mean, my big question is it's still a little unclear to me, and it was alluded to in the presentation, what boat storage would remain on the parcels of this project, where, when, how, and does that interrupt any other things that are sort of planned? So maybe you guys could clarify that.
Nels, do you want me to talk about that a little bit?
Yes.
If, I'm not sure who's got control, if you can go back to the drawing showing, the last site plan.
We'll do that now.
Okay, so there is one with a circle and showing the traffic and the flow. Yep, there you go, that one. So the operations are in the process of changing for the boats. Up to the right, that arrow that runs along Taganic Boulevard ends, directly east of that, that's the shop area. So boats need to be hauled out where the circle is, and then either they're on a trailer and they just get dragged up and shoved in the shop, or shoved, wherever along the private property site that you see where there are pictures of it, or into the shed, or they get carted away on the trailer to our offsite storage. The transfer from hauling it, the vehicle hauling it out, which has a large circuit, large rotating area, takes place basically in that area of that circle and just north a little bit. And the staging for the equipment, particularly in the offsite or the hauling and launch seasons, would be up at the end of the arrow that is pointing west, where you'll recall in the site plan itself, it says flex space that may be used partially for staging when we are in the super busy season. But other than that, and that also, this also circulation diagram is currently, with the exception of the east-west version there, what we have now, and has been working well. And so, but it is also the reason for that area directly west of the launch area that's kind of got hash marks on it, in that circle area, has to be kind of flat to allow it. And also that is the reason for the second ingress and egress to go around the boat operations during the day if there's a boat in the middle of the street being transferred, in essence. And this is kind of how the operations have been working for the last 40 or 50 years. Obviously cradles and boats can't be stored where they are now, or where there's a hotel or the anchor building.
So how many in that reinforced flex space, maybe if you go to the other diagram, whoever is controlling, right? How many boats do you think that you would kind of on a short-term basis be able to put there compared to what you do now?
I don't envision using it particularly as storage, but kind of a constant in and out in the spring and fall. And given what we're trying to do as far as offsite storage, it shouldn't be more than 10 or so at a time, or it may be cradles, which is what the frames are that hold up the boats, or that sort of thing. Or occasionally a truck or something. And then accommodations can be made when we know, for example, on Fridays when it's going to be crazy busy as far as parking or people, then we clear it out of there.
Right. So you've thought about, sorry for monopolizing the questions here, but you guys have thought about the fact that there would be increased traffic, both pedestrian and vehicular, on the site with these two developments, and therefore add additional complexity to the timing and the movement of boats in and out.
Yes, we have. And that's the reason why the pedestrians are moved south. So they're not in the hall launch area. You see right there, the way south blue line comes here, goes around, stays away. They're right there, crosses, it can cross over. And then, yep, right over there. And also that's the reason for the two-way right above where it says Marina, I think Operations, the two-way yellow just east of the anchor building, a little bit north of the, yeah, right there. Yep. So they can go around if we are operating right there in that above the Marina Operations, in that orange back and forth, a car can go around.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add or a question around that? And Doug?
So in other words, there will only be temporary boat storage in that flex space. You won't have
Correct.
10 or 14 boats in that area year round?
No, it would not be year round. That's not an option. We understand that.
Okay.
And so Nels, my question to you would be, in terms of converting this from a question mark to a yes, I guess it's about knowing what language we would want to have in the DDA, if any, around this, right?
Yeah, I think defining the location, clarifying what you just said, Steve, in terms of like kind of memorializing that in terms of the change from the current conditions with lots of boat storage and a lot of cradle storage to what you're proposing, I think is one of the frameworks that could move this to a yes. I think there were some other related issues related to the boating center that, were some discussions early on about the solar, which we've discussed, but there also was an effort to kind of upgrade that boat storage building where it's got some pretty large oxidized roof panels, and looking at maybe some sort of a overall upgrading of some of the visuals of the building. I know you've done some improvements in terms of landscaping and some street frontages on the building. And then there was a little bit of it was unclear what was going on at the very northern end where you said you were taking down a wall, but keeping another wall or something like that.
I can explain.
Hard to
if you
understand
pull
what's
that-
going on there.
If you want, I can pull up, if you pull up that drawing again, the last one. Just real quick. So up at the north end in the boathouse, down a little bit from there, right? Yeah, right in there. Okay, so currently there is a shed roof that comes out parallel with, boy, it's hard to explain. Where that parking is, where the numbers, I can't see how many, yeah, right now that shed roof extends over the parking. We would remove that shed roof over that parking, so there's actually more parking there. And the wall there that separates, that's under the shed roof would be in some fashion removed or made less of an obstruction so a pedestrian can get some sense of, and so you can get some sense of view to the water through there. And that's that primary, I think that's the primary improvement. And as far as the solar, I too was hoping that the solar would be able to, I think the solar panels probably look nicer than a steel roof. But unfortunately, you really can't have the project itself can't take advantage of a solar site that is owned, wholly by somebody else, and it's not as though they can rent the roof. So, and you can also do it with financing. So, the roof, is certainly we cannot make a commitment as part of this project that we would redo the roof. It is what it is. We have spruced up and brought in a new retailer more towards the south end. Krenzer Marine is in place, and that is spruced up now. And the boats, where it says Marina Operations, will be display boats, at least during the season.
Nels, is that a new hand or an existing hand?
That was the existing hand, sorry.
Okay. All right, so it seems like maybe Nels and Steve, you guys can just get some clarity of language, just so we have that in the DDA, yeah? Okay. Now we don't have the issues list up again, so let me grab that. Okay, so next was ground level activity, right? I think if this may be one of our bigger questions here. So there's a lot of discussion in the process of getting to the ENA and getting to here about how the current residents of Ithaca, who are not living on the site and not staying overnight in the stays, would benefit from this project by increased year-round activity. And I think this was keenly an interest of Common Council as well. And I don't see much in the revised submission that addresses this. So maybe either we're overlooking it, or maybe you want to kind of clarify what you're proposing here.
Scott, or do you want me to take this? It's,
why don't we put up a site plan and we can go through the ground level activities? Steve, if you talk about the buildings, and then we'll talk about moving around the site.
So the major increase in ground level activity is going to be, cleaning it up so it's not rather intimidating bunch of, boat storage equipment, where the stays and, is right now. And as far as taking advantage of it for not people who aren't staying in the stays and or not, at the anchor, there's already a lot of activity that this is going to, increase access to, not only the docks, which are private now, in essence, the Coast Guard's locked it up. That would become a public access area. And just generally the whole opening up of access to the water for a walkway. And it would help the commercial activity that's existing now. Between the bait shop and boat rentals and hopefully the docks, that's kind of the primary of what we're doing here.
So clarifying access, clarifying both vehicular and pedestrian and bike access along here is one of the big goals of the project as a whole. As we all know, it's super confusing down there. And as Steve says, rather intimidating if you don't know it well, particularly if you're walking or on a bike. And so to continue to look at ways that make it really clear the access to the water through the site, access to the boatyard grill, to the commercial facility, the marina facility, as well as the newly reopened dock. I think it has a name now. It's just reopening. And I can't remember that name. I just read about that. But of course, along the western edge of the water. And right now, it doesn't feel, particularly with the Coast Guard building, that you're invited there, and making sure that one does feel one's invited through the clarity of the landscape.
Yeah, well, I welcome comments from the other committee members. I mean, my thoughts are the following. The first is, I think there's a missed opportunity with not upgrading the part of the promenade that is on the easement. And that's because, the change in going from first of all, you go to the bridge. The bridge presents a visible obstacle into of itself, right? And then you go from asphalt to stone dust. So it kind of sends this message that maybe I'm not in a place where I should be, right? And I think of other places that have been upgraded, the north part of Treeman Marina, and even that trail to the farmer's market that used to be like a herd path, right? You make those things kind of like, clearly the public is invited, and both of those areas have had tremendous use. And so you're making investments elsewhere on the site for the connections and the wraparound from Lookout Point, which are awesome. But the risk is that we're left with this kind of big discontiguous piece that people are still unclear of. Do I belong here, right? So that's one comment I would have. And the second is, I'm a little worried, and I know Common Council raised this too, is that the nature of the hotel and the anchor, if there's no clear way for the public to access that, and I understand the issues around the anchor, but you have then these restricted areas, so the playground, the pool, amenities for the people who are using those properties, and it again sort of sends a mixed message about whether or not the public is welcome on this site, or whether or not I'm kind of interloping in a private property kind of situation. And so having definitive things that are designed to actually attract the public to the site, kind of overcome that, whereas the passive uses make it more difficult in my view. But let me open it up to the rest of the committee for additional. I thought I saw Doug's hand at one point, but.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Chris, about the along the canal there, talking to Rick Manning of the French Stewart Park, and the waterfront trail is 10 to 12 feet wide in most places. I think that we should, see it at least that wide along that whole western side. And I'd even like to see the crosswalks from Taganet Boulevard that wide across rather than just sidewalk width. I think that will, make much better public access to the waterfront there, and better connections back over to Buffalo Street and the waterfront trail going across there. My wish list, in addition to other public amenities, would be a public restroom and access to some kind of cafe that the public could use there.
Charlotte, over to you. Looks like you're also on.
Yeah, I'll third both of these points. I'll second point the restroom. I think that we had public comment about that, and I think that would be really great. There are, I agree with the developers in saying, hey, look, this is a lot better than it is now. And I strongly agree with that. It is a lot better than it is now, but it is public land and we can make it even better. So figuring out a way to make it open to everybody, wider trails in between the buildings, certainly like lawn space or like an inviting public space to have a picnic or do a pop-up Shakespeare show or something like that. The flex space on the reinforced lawn, there's a lot of green space there. And can we do something with that? Cafe, a cafe, I know that was like kicked around and there were like more like, where's the ice cream shop kind of comments earlier in this process. And I still love that conversation, but I also understand you all got development to run here. So, I mean, I think if you could make it a little bit more appealing, and you got a lot of green space to do that. So that's my input. Yeah, and certainly a public restroom or something like that would be great. There's a lot of space here, and I kind of got lost on exactly what the connection is southbound to the waterfront trail. So if there is kind of a way to more clearly integrate it into the waterfront trail system, either signage or something, I think that would help a lot. And it would actually increase business and flow of traffic across to the Boatyard Grill and things like that. So the more people that come here that don't actually live here or stay at the stays or the anchor, the better. And just by way of question, the anchor building there, that parking is all underground at the anchor, is that correct? That's like a ground floor parking and the anchor itself covers that whole big rectangle?
Right, the parking's under the building at the south side there where you can see it delineated.
So, yeah, the building footprint extends all the way across the parking. Is that correct? Okay, yeah, I'm not an expert at reading these things. I just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
So that trail connectivity is, we hear that, and that's part of the goal of the project. And whether that's through material or signage, we'll continue to look at that because that certainly would be, we agree 100%, a great thing for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in the interest of moving this forward, we could put something in, like, I don't think we need to like collectively design this right now, and that's not the purpose of our committee here. So I think kind of like green lighting it and saying that like wider consideration will be made for public enjoyment of walkways within the site plan or something like that, would get us through that. Because I understand too that we're looking at the highest level thing here. And from this point, it looks like, hey, there's these stark walkways. You're forgetting all the other people. And I'm sure that's not what you would actually build. So to the extent we could just include something that says, hey, we're going to consider the public. And but the restroom thing's a little harder. I do actually there is really a lack of restrooms out that side. I mean, there's a public restroom that's occasionally open where the softball fields are on the other side. But I don't know about here through the later hours in the day, but.
Nels, you mentioned that we're not allowed to put anything vertical in that easement. Would that include something like benches? Because that's an obvious thing to put along the path, but if that's not allowed in the easement, that's important for us to know.
My understanding is that we would need DEC approval for anything that's above ground, and they have not historically been open to things like light poles. So when the design of that promenade was presented to DEC, it moved all the kind of amenities just outside the 25-foot wide easement area. So you can get really close to it, but you're 25 feet from the edge of the water.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
All
right.
It seems to me the area in between, I mean, I think, Charlotte was crafting some language or talking about crafting some language. I think as we move down through the list, there's, and as Nell drafted earlier, we may be coming back in any event in whenever at a somewhat later date. And maybe if we can agree to look at these things and give you rather than an off the cuff response, we hear what you're saying and try to come up with some solutions. Public restrooms, present a lot of issues, liability and maintenance and so on and so forth. And 12-foot wide sidewalks when you have a 15 or 25-foot one running the length of the project in any event. Despite, I think Scott said there being a lot of green space, there isn't a lot of space here. I mean, it's still pretty tight. It doesn't say there aren't solutions that we can look at. But I think public restrooms would be a challenge, but
yeah, so I think you're right, Steve. I mean, I think we're not asking you guys to design this on the spot by any stretch. And I think we're gonna have to buy a little time anyway to work through a couple of the other issues. So, but I would say give it one more like good creative brainstorm and see what you can come back with. And again, yes, there was been all kinds of talk about ice cream shops and whatever. Like I think what we need to demonstrate is that there is some fixed or semi-fixed activity concepts here that are more about the use of the site beyond just passive green space. And I think if we can hit that, I think we will have hit something that we can all get excited about. Okay, mindful of time here. I think really with Coast Guard, and again, maybe this is something that could be taken offline, is obviously you're saying the building has to come down because of the DEC requirement. It seems like you're suggesting the option, at least for the Coast Guard Auxiliary, to continue to kind of use space at the stays. It sounded maybe though a little conditional. So I think maybe we're just trying to kind of clarify what exactly is going to be available to them. Do they inputted into that or not? And maybe some of the answers to these questions here, but I think it was a little unclear what remains for the Coast Guard Auxiliary on the site.
So are you asking me like what?
Or whoever has the best answer, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we've said from the get-go is inside the stays there would be a hotel conference room that they would be able to give their classes at, and to the extent that they are outside, hopefully the DEC would allow those docks to continue, probably permitted to the city, though I don't know how that would work. And that is it. They already have, and New York State Parks up at Treman already gives them a place from which they can operate their boat. They could certainly bring their boat down here, for classes or whatever, but they don't run safety patrols out of this boat here. They run that out of Treman, or at least they can, which is much closer to the lake, which makes a lot of sense if there's any kind of emergency. But that would be the extent of the accommodation to the Coast Guard Auxiliary. But we're not reserving for them like a continued and isolated, exclusively controlled by them, basically a clubhouse, which I recognize they have now. But their mission regarding safety, we would accommodate by their ability to have meetings, in a hotel conference room, much like anybody could reserve one there.
Nels, what do you feel like we need here?
I think we're going to be asked what are the exact terms that are being offered, and I think we need to provide a clear answer. Is it for free? Is it for charge? What is the size of the room that they have access to? Those are going to be kind of the questions I expect will come up at some point in this process, and I think we need to provide a clear answer.
Currently, the DEC owns that building and is providing it to the Coast Guard Auxiliary at a lease or for free?
it's a license agreement and it doesn't have a required fee, although the Coast Guard Auxiliary does pay for their own maintenance of the building and the grounds.
Okay. All right.
They
So-
don't structure those license agreements like that anymore.
Yes, I would imagine not. So, all right, Steve, maybe a sentence or two that further clarifies what the offer is, seems like is what Nels is asking for, and then we can review that.
And hey, Chris,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, Charlotte,
I
go
would
ahead.
I would just encourage the developers to talk to the Coast Guard before they bring it back to us.
Mhm.
Just, it's gonna make it a lot quicker because they're not shy about weighing in when it doesn't work for them. So if we want to keep this on track, I'd encourage you to talk to them sooner rather than later.
Very good point, Charlotte, as we've had lots of public comment from them at prior
Yeah,
meetings.
it'll just loop back and delay it. And, you know, on the previous point, I want to kind of move this forward based on, I think overall, this is much better for the community all across the board. So the more we can move it, the better, I think.
Great, so let's just look at L and M. So multimodal mobility connections. Some of this is what we were just talking about with the Western Promenade. And then I think the second question, Nels, correct me if I'm wrong, is around who is actually constructing and paying for these? Is it the city or is it the developer or some hybrid?
Right, and I think it would benefit the understanding of the site plan to define what areas of the site are actually public access and what areas are clearly, privatized. There's some suggestions that the walkways are, definitely the walkways connecting Teganic Boulevard to the waterfront trail are going to be available for public access, but I think it's anybody's judgment on what does that mean in practice. Is that just the sidewalk or is there a wider swath? Are there other, those kind of issues? So more of a clarification. And again, the terms of the ENA suggest that any improvements outside of the right of way are the responsibility of the developer. So anticipate, unless we hear otherwise, that those locations or those connections would be, responsibility of the developer, both for construction and maintenance, unless we hear otherwise.
So Steve, I can't tell if you're talking. Yes. go
So
ahead.
I was muted. The connections within the site that we are purchasing, yes. Or are you referring to something else?
No, within the site, those connections that are going east-west to the waterfront trail from Teganic Boulevard area.
Connections from the waterfront trail.
The
Oh, you mean
pedestrian
like
connections.
going east-west,
East-west, yes.
right? Right. But not, for example, the road itself, roadway, and really it's tough to see how, to the extent that there would be, I mean, we can talk about this, but to change the public, the easement running along the flood control channel would be difficult to make part of the project.
Why is that?
It's not property we're buying.
It actually is.
City property.
Well, you actually would be buying it. It's city owned, that is got an easement over it.
No. The property lines and the dimensions, there's 25 or 50 feet that going up to the edge of the water, or sorry, 15 or 25 feet along the waterfront. That would not be ours. That remains owned by, I think it's the DEC.
Well, I think we need to do a little research on that. Why don't we work that out on a sidebar, Steve?
Okay.
Okay, so can I just get clarity there? So what we're saying is improvements for pedestrian and bicycle, et cetera, within the project site, the developer has confirmed that they are responsible for. Improvements in the right of way, the developer has confirmed that that is the city's responsibility, which we're going to come back to in 1 second. And then Nels and Steve, you're going to kind of clarify, where is the property line on the west? Does it go all the way to the water, but with a 25-foot easement? Or is it, as Steve understands, that actually his property line will only go up to the easement? Is the way I'm understanding that debate. You guys will take that offline and figure that out.
Will do.
Okay. So, and I think the answer to those questions could help us clarify L and M. So, but let's talk about the public right of way. So the ENA said what on this? Do you remember exactly which clause this is, Snells? I'm trying to find it. Right, other improvements proposed within the road right-of-way shall be the responsibility of the developer. So this is 2C3, I believe. 2C3.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
essential terms and conditions.
And
Page
then, but
five, page 5 of 12.
Yeah, and then it continues on to page 6 is where I was just reading. Which seems in conflict with what's in the revised submission and what Steve just said is his understanding of who's paying for the improvements in the public road right-of-way. So we can talk about that here, but it may also require an additional sidebar to get clear on. I'm happy to take it either way.
I guess I just want to be clear. I mean, if there's an improvement, along the border or something, we have to put granite curbs or something, but we're not rebuilding a roadway. That's not something that we can do. And that road, fine, then we will withdraw the drawings that show a nice parking along the road, but that would require essentially rebuilding the road to city standards, which is not something. I mean, we don't own the road. We can't do that. It would cost millions of dollars, well, at least a private person. I don't know how much it would cost, but certainly we're not budgeting rebuilding a public roadway. I guess we need to be clear about that. And I would suggest that the road does need to be, rehab. We've been asking for some fairly basic maintenance for a long time.
I think everybody wants to see the entire site, upgraded, but I don't think we can commit the city to incur the costs of upgrades shown on the site plan that are located within the right of way. So
Okay.
maybe it's a matter of just withdrawing that phrase that the upgrades in the right of way will be expected to be completed by the city. I think it could be through a negotiation because the city does recognize that roadway has gone many years without improvement, but I don't think we can assume that the city will undertake the improvements shown in the site plan that are located in the right of way.
Yeah, that seems to me to be the disconnect, right? Is
Okay.
that you guys are you're proposing a specific circulation plan with a median and parking in a certain way, right? Which may or may not be what the city would do if the city on its own were to basically reconstruct that road, right? So I think we have to kind of figure out how to fuse those two things together. And
Yes.
then it becomes another issue, right? Because then that becomes, right, it becomes a city capital project, which the city has to fund, which the IURA doesn't control either.
Right. So
Yeah.
just to be clear, we have not altered or infringed upon really the roadway other than cleaning up the parking, I guess is what you would say, but we haven't done any improvements as far as our project itself, building a building that impinges upon the roadway. We've been very careful not to do that. If you want to move the roadway or whatever, that's obviously going to be the city's bailiwick.
Yeah, what we have shown on the site plan is sort of a master plan for what we would like the site to look like. But the development portion could certainly happen and function with the road in its current condition. And in its current alignment, it would not be ideal. But it may require some additional, I guess what you would call a curb cut, although there's no curbs currently. But other than that, you know, we could work around the existing road if the city is never going to improve it.
I think we can show that a lot more clearly graphically, so that everyone knows exactly what we're proposing and what we're looking to the city to do.
Yeah, I think we should be clear. I think there should be a view of this, which kind of connecting the last issue and this issue, right? So a view of the schematic that is on page 24 of our packet. I don't know where it is in your stuff, right? That shows what would the development look like using the existing right of way, right? And which doesn't have this double loop road and these trees in the middle and all of that, right? So basically it shows that, and then makes clear that if there were any other improvements you're expecting the city to make in the rest of your plan, you're clear with what those are, right? So we just talked about the east-west connectors as being the responsibility of the developer, et cetera. So, but if there are anything residual after you take the major right-of-way out that you were expecting the city to pay for, figure out a way to create a diagram that highlights those with a color or something so that we know what those are. I think that would be helpful, Scott. And then, you know, and keep this, right? This is your idea of how you would like the circulation and the flow to work. But yeah, you're not, I guess, you know, Steve's right. You're not in control of this, and you're not going to pay millions of dollars to improve this road. So let's make it clear what you are willing to commit to and differentiate it from what the city would have to do.
I think that clarity would help us all.
Yep. And we all know what that road looks like. So then we can figure out what to do about that from there. Okay, Nels, I have lost a little track as to where we are. Oh, the environmental cleanup cost is the last remaining.
Well, I think there was one more issue related to the circulation, which was the continuity of the loop at the north end of the boat center. The trail seems to have just a tiny little gap in it right there, and on the site plan.
Where's that?
I
Can
felt
you-
more comfortable when they had the view up with the blue arrows.
Yeah, it should.
That one seemed to show it as continuous.
Let's go back to that image.
Yeah.
So that area is it's a complicated little design problem. If you can zoom in to that portion, a lot of the Boatyard Grill's current functional back of house happens right on that side between that and the Finger Lakes Boating Center. There's dumpsters in that location. There's some existing parking spaces. It's also where they get deliveries for food. They have tractor trailers backing up to that location. So connecting through that area would require some modifications and some reorganizing of some elements there to make it work. But we think it is possible, and we think it would be a big advantage to creating a loop at this location.
And it's a site design we have not done at this point in any detail. But certainly that connectivity would be the desire.
Right, but where's the one with the blue arrows, right? Can you bring that one up? Yeah, that one. Oh, I see. So you're showing it, but right now it's discontinuous because you haven't figured out how that would work.
We haven't moved into that level of design.
Where is it discontinuous?
So it shows like that blue that's there, like Steve, right? That's like, I don't know.
Oh, between the dumpster and the
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So it shows like it's connected, but I think what you're saying is physically right now it couldn't be connected without some other.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so yeah.
Plan
Okay.
show the movement of the dumpster, the new sidewalk, or whatever landscaping is left over. That again is not at this conceptual schematic phase design.
Right.
A lot of that's already in place, though, just so you know, except for right around the dumpster and right by a reconfigured building shed area and going across the street or across the parking. Otherwise, most of that's there. There is already a route around the restaurant and a parking lot. Oh, a sidewalk.
Yeah, I think the issue is just if you're going to say you're going to have a continuous loop, it's got to be a continuous loop and it's
Yep.
got to be readily understandable to the public. How does that work? Where do they go? Where do they walk?
Absolutely. And then agreed all around.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say, as long as we all agree that there should be a continuous loop, later design and stuff will work that out. Yeah,
Totally agree with that, but also want to another underscore the wider crosswalk towards the potential kayak boat thing. If people are going to be publicly bringing in kayaks, they're going to need wider than a 4-foot sidewalk to drag their kayak from the parking area over down to that dock.
Great, Doug.
yeah, noted on that.
Currently, we're showing all of the proposed sidewalks a minimum of 5 feet. I think that connection there is 6 feet. You know, we could certainly look at making it wider, but 5 foot is the minimum for the sidewalk widths that we're showing.
But again, we have not looked at you know, at the end of the day, one needs to move comfortably a kayak across there. And so that'll be a goal that I don't think we've met as yet.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and it may be just water access. That's really what's feasible, and it creates a destination on the water. But as far as having a launch site, that's a different kettle of fish. But we can talk about that.
Programmatically, yeah, clearly in this site plan.
Yeah, inevitably though, people will probably try to do it. So it's like plan for it now or deal with it later is probably what would end up happening. Okay. Really conscious of trying to get us to wrapping this up. I think the only thing on the environmental cleanup costs that we wanted to kind of clarify, we understand that you're taking the cost of the environmental remediation against the price of the land. I think we probably will just, Nels finesse my language, I think we'll just want to look for some clarification that we are paying for the legitimate third-party costs of that cleanup as justified by a contract or an invoice or something, so that we just need to know that that we're paying for the actual cleanup of that cost and no sort of not additional project management time or other things that are related to that. And because we're recognizing that this is an open-ended thing that we don't really know, and we have that, and we understand though that it's the city's responsibility. Okay, so Nels, I think we could probably the main need of this resolution is to request an extension to the timeline, which I know you flagged for Steve earlier today. I'm a little fuzzy as to what to do with this table based on all this discussion. And maybe it would be sufficient to simply say, whereas on August 23rd, IURA Economic Development Committee reviewed the sponsor's submission against pre-identified issues resolved and noted additional areas to review with the developer, right? And
Right.
Right, because I'm afraid that right now we're not going to get this table updated properly. That's my concern.
Yep, I agree. We need a little more time to work out the details on it. And but again, the action of the Urban Renewal Agency would be to grant a time extension, so to be able to work to address the issues. So the table is not critical for that resolution. It's just the fact that we haven't reached 100% agreement on every issue yet.
Yeah. Agreed. And then I think the resolved could then still stand as they are. My only concern, so I didn't catch this earlier. So it requires a developer to resubmit development program materials at least 7 days prior to the next IURA EDC meeting. So they would have to submit by the 4th for a meeting on the 11th. I mean, to Charlotte's point, like, we want to get this over the finish line. Right? And we want to have something that we're able to look at on the 11th that we can say yes to. And so I just, part of me wonders if that's enough staff time to work through any sort of questions between the developer and staff.
Now, did you want to talk about the level of commitment required? You know, the issues that are raised by the DEC, you know, getting that commitment from the DEC.
Right, well, so let me address one issue at a time here first. One is, I think Chris is asking, the non-DEC issues, can they be, resolved in a way that brings forward to the EDC at the next meeting enough information they can make a final decision without, going back through another sequence. And there's, I think that submission of information that additional information provide can be provided throughout the next couple of weeks. It doesn't have to wait to a deadline date, and we can work on issues, as they come up, and so we can be ready for it. So I think that would be the best way to work through these issues, because there's several of them, and some are just a matter of language, and some require significant thought on your part about how you want to respond. And then the point you're raising, Steve, is that the DEC transfer is not finalized, and in fact, that it's difficult for you to move forward to the next phase of this project without knowing to incur the costs of site plan review kind of preparation without knowing that the DEC transfer is going to go through in a agreeable fashion. So I think what would be something to consider would be to give you more, to provide another time extension once the agency has agreed upon a disposition development agreement, to give you more time before we start the clock going and running for those next milestones, because I think you do need to have some assurances that the DEC transfer is going to proceed in a way that works for the project. But that could be a future step after the agency has proposed a DDA to you. I think they could be part of that resolution, to look at giving more time to start the clock for the next phase and wait until the DEC agreement has been more or less finalized or proposed. So I don't think we need to wrap it into this resolution. I think we could just say that a condition of the DDA would be a mutually acceptable property transfer between the DEC city and developer. At this point in time, it's got to be worked out eventually, of course. But I don't think it has to be prior to the proposed disposition development agreement.
As long as it's understood, because the E&A anticipated moving after the DDA through the site plan approval with various timelines, that this has a serious impact.
That's what I'm suggesting. It would be to toll the timeline after that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's possible the project goes into some sort of suspended animation, right? For a period of time, right? We get a DDA, but then until we can resolve the DEC issues, you're not moving anything forward. You're not putting out additional resources to try to do site plan review, et cetera.
It's pretty hard to, yeah.
That seems reasonable to me. Okay, so are the rest of these dates workable then, both for the developer and Nels? I think, as you rightly point out, I think if we can maybe, after this meeting, just kind of clarify a memo maybe to them from you to them, just so like what we believe the open issues are, like go through Charles's minutes, et cetera, then there's no reason why we can't be ticking those off throughout. We don't have to wait until October 4th. I think that would, in fact, I would recommend that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Doug, Charlotte, is that clear what we're doing here? Yeah. All right. Can we get a motion then for this resolution minus the table? We'll take the table out. Thank you, Doug. Second, Charlotte. Yep. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor? Great. That's 3-0. We have a special IURA meeting, we hope Thursday. Steve will bring the same resolution. We won't have to go through all this discussion. We'll just extend the timeline and then that'll come back to you. Great. Guys, I really appreciate that this is tedious. There's a lot of detail here. and it's a really complex site, and you're trying to do the best you can within this complex site. I really do think we're getting close to the finish line here, and really appreciate you're just sticking with it a few more weeks here until we can get it there. Great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
very much.
Bye.
Okay.
All right, really quickly, financials. Are there financials?
No, there are no financials available. This is the month our accountant took several weeks off for vacation, which we encourage because she builds up a lot of comp time in other parts of the year. So we'll get those to you when they're available. We'll send them out separately by email.
Fine. Anything else on a staff report?
Nothing that is, no staff report.
The only thing I would just say is, on the one hand, we're working to get another member to the committee. We don't have an interview scheduled. I thought we were going to have one this week, Nels, but maybe this has preempted your ability to get an interview scheduled.
No, we've had some conversations with Heather Sanford. She's indicated
Okay.
interest, but we're having trouble connecting to set the actual interview time.
Okay, if you need more availability from me, let me know. And if I can't remember if Charlotte, you were on the email thread where Doug has indicated he wants to step down from the committee once we get a suitable replacement, which
Yeah.
totally understandable, Doug, for how long you've done this. But yeah, so then we'll need, really then we're filling the empty spot. Doug would then retire or whatever from the committee, and then we would replace Doug. We would have to find a recruitment to replace
Okay.
Doug.
Yeah, I wasn't on that email thread, and then I'm eventually moving out of town. So so y'all need to think that through too. So
You're killing me, guys.
all right. It's
All right. What's your timeline for that, Charlotte?
it's up in the air. I mean, I can talk about it offline.
Okay. All right. Let us know offline so we can have planning some sort of pipeline here.
Mhm.
Okay. Mostly just worried about getting this through while Leslie is accusing herself. So let's try to
Yeah.
hold it together at least through October
Well,
11th.
on that note, it's October 11, is that right?
That the next meeting would be
Is the next meeting? Yeah,
October
no,
11th.
that's fine. I mean, I'm
Okay.
here at least through the next several months.
Okay.
It's just something that longer term, the committee does have to think that through. And then I think maybe I mentioned this previously, but I'm not available for the first 2 weeks of September, and then I'm virtual later in October, but I should be able to make, but I don't think that affects this group. So,
Right. In September, there's no meeting. So the next
Okay,
meeting is October 11th, which could be in person.
okay. Is there a way to join that virtually if necessary or no?
It's complicated.
October 11. I mean, I just need to know it. If it's October 11 in person, I think I can make it.
Yeah. And maybe we can try to get Heather seated by then.
Yeah, that'd be
So
great.
So we have a
you-
backup plan in the event that you are unavailable.
Yeah,
Okay.
Heather's a huge asset. I'd love to have her, and I can make 11th in person.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I think we should assume 11th in person. I mean, the governor keeps extending it, but let's not rely on that. And we'll try to get Heather seated by then as well.
Okay. That's great.
Okay.
I know that we'd proposed a couple of others as well. There was Herb Alexander, and then from the airport, not from the airport, from Cuga Medical Center. And then there was Cheyenne, who's an economics professor from Ithaca College. Both, I think, really
Yes.
good candidates.
So we are also in contact with Cheyenne.
Okay.
Potentially might be interest on her part for the NI committee as well. So we're working that through, but tomorrow I think is the interview with her. I think.
No, I think it's Thursday or Friday, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Herb Alexander runs, he's like the chief diversity officer for Cuga Medical Center and had expressed interest. He and I had interacted on another issue, but kind of new in town. He's going to get hooks in him in a bunch of other ways. So I think the sooner we move on that, the better.
Yeah, we did reach out to Herb and he did respond, but then we've kind of lost a thread there. So we'll try to pick that back up again.
You'll lose him otherwise. Pretty positive.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Thanks everyone I know we ran a little long today. It was good.
Yeah, no,
discussing.
thanks for moving it forward. It's a super detail oriented thing. So it's good for the community and I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah, me too. All right. See you all on the 11th then.
Okay,
Great.
thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.